I was admitted to the hospital after a car accident left me battered but alive. 2 fractured ribs, a mild concussion, and a deep gash above my eyebrow that required stitches. It wasn't life-threatening, but the doctors insisted I stay overnight for observation, mostly to make sure the head injury didn't turn into something more serious. Hospitals always unnerved me. The smell of antiseptic, the 2 bright lights, the hushed voices of staff moving down endless white corridors, it all felt more like a mausoleum than a place of healing. That night, it was worse. I was sore, restless, and every time I closed my eyes, the memory of screeching tires and shattered glass replayed in my mind. Around 1:30 a.m., I must have drifted into a shallow sleep. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the monitor tracking my vitals. That's when I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was nurses outside my door, but as I blinked awake, I realized the whispers were inside the room. And then I saw him. A man stood at the foot of my bed. He wasn't dressed like the staff I'd seen earlier. He wore a doctor's coat, but it was old-fashioned, like something from decades ago, with long lapels and a yellowed name tag I couldn't read. His skin was ashen, his face sunken, like someone who hadn't slept or eaten in weeks. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice rasping as though every word scraped his throat raw. I froze. My first thought was hallucination. The concussion, the pain meds, maybe my brain was playing tricks. But then I glanced at the heart monitor beside me. My pulse was climbing, spiking higher with every passing second. If this was just in my head, why was my body reacting like it wasn't? The figure stepped closer, and I saw he was holding a clipboard. On it was my patient chart. At least, it looked like mine. But as he turned it toward me, my stomach lurched. In thick black ink across the page were the words, "Time of death, 2:47. That was 5 minutes away. I fumbled for the call button, slamming it with my thumb. Nothing happened. No beep, no signal light, nothing. I mashed it again, harder, panicked, still dead. The man in the coat tilted his head, studying me. His eyes were milky, cloudy, like a film had grown over them. "Not you," he croaked. "Not yet." And then he turned, walked toward the corner of the room, and simply faded into the shadows, vanishing as though he'd never been there. I lay there, drenched in sweat, staring at the empty space where he had stood. The minutes crawled by in suffocating silence. At exactly 2:47, I heard it. A flatline tone echoing faintly from the room next door. Nurses burst into motion, rushing past my door. "Code Blue, room 312, I heard someone shout. The pounding of feet, the whir of a crash cart, the desperate commands, "Clear, clear again," filled the hall. I lay frozen in bed, every muscle locked in fear. I didn't need to hear the final words to know what had happened. When morning came, I asked my nurse what happened to the man next door. Her cheerful demeanor faltered, and she hesitated before telling me he had passed unexpectedly in the night. I swallowed hard, then asked what time. She glanced at her notes. Around 2:47 a.m. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. I couldn't tell her why I asked. I couldn't even explain it to myself. But I knew it wasn't coincidence. Later that morning, as they wheeled the body out of room 312, I caught a glimpse of his chart clipped to the gurney. My heart stuttered. Written in thick black marker, in the exact same hand I'd seen only hours before, were the words, "Time of death, 2:47. It wasn't just written once, it was scrawled over and over across the front page, as though whoever had written it wanted to make absolutely certain it was true. That was years ago. I've avoided hospitals ever since. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up and swear I hear that same rasping whisper by my bed. "You shouldn't be here." When you're a medical intern, you learn fast that hospitals are alive at night in a way most people never see. The daytime bustle gives way to silence, but it's not peaceful silence. It's tense, like the building itself is holding its breath. Machines hum in empty rooms, monitors beep faintly down the hall, and sometimes you hear things you can't explain. Footsteps where no one should be, voices that vanish when you round a corner. The hospital I worked in had 12 floors. The basement, of course, was where the morgue was kept. None of us liked going down there. During orientation, one of the senior residents joked, "Don't take the B2 elevator after midnight unless you want company." We laughed, but the way he said it left a knot in my stomach. It was a little after 3 in the morning when it happened. I had just finished drawing blood from a post-op patient, and the samples needed to get to the lab. The lab was on the first floor, and I was exhausted, running on caffeine and nerves. The stairwell felt endless, so I headed to the elevator instead. The doors slid open, and without thinking, I stepped inside. My mistake was not checking. I pressed the button for the first floor, and immediately something felt wrong. The overhead light flickered, and instead of rising, the elevator groaned and began to sink. My stomach dropped as the floor numbers ticked downward. 3, 2, 1. G, B, 1. Then the screen glowed. B2. Morgue. I hadn't pressed that button. The elevator shuddered to a stop and the doors opened with a hiss. A wave of icy air rolled in, carrying the chemical tang of formaldehyde and something heavier. Decay. Faint but unmistakable. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. I could see the double doors of the storage room at the far end, the stainless steel handles gleaming faintly. The morgue technician wouldn't be here for hours. This place should have been locked up tight. I jabbed the close door button. The doors began to slide shut, and then froze halfway. A shrill beep filled the cabin, and the doors slid back open again. That's when I saw him. At first, he was just a shadow in the distance, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a man, standing barefoot in a hospital gown, swaying slightly like a puppet on a string. His skin was tinged gray-blue, veins dark beneath the surface. His head hung at a grotesque angle, bent so far to the side I knew his neck must have been broken. He started shuffling forward, slow, dragging steps against the tile. His mouth opened and closed as though trying to form words, but no sound came out, only a wet, sucking gasp. I hammered the close door button with both hands, my pulse spiking so fast the monitor in my pocket beeped. Nothing happened. The elevator didn't respond. The man was closer now, and with each lurching step, his head lolled further, nearly dangling from his shoulders. Finally, the doors screeched shut, and the elevator jolted upward so violently I nearly fell to my knees. The ride was rough, like something was holding the car back, dragging at it. The cables whined as if under strain. When the elevator stopped on the 6th floor, the doors burst open and I bolted out. My heart hammered in my chest, and I leaned against the wall, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. A janitor spotted me. He frowned, asked if I was okay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. I started to answer, but something made me glance back at the elevator. The doors had already closed, but in the polished steel surface I caught my reflection. Only it wasn't just mine. Behind me, clear as day, was the man in the hospital gown. His broken neck rested on my shoulder, his clouded eyes staring directly into mine. When I spun around, no one was there. The janitor asked again if I was all right. I didn't answer. I just walked away and never took that elevator again. I was in my 3rd year of medical school, assigned to a trauma rotation. Nights were brutal. The endless rush of patients, the smell of antiseptic and blood, the shrill beeping of monitors that drilled into your skull until you couldn't hear silence anymore. One night, around 1 a.m., they brought in a middle-aged man who'd been in a high-speed car crash. Paramedics worked on him all the way in. CPR, bag valve mask ventilations, epinephrine, the works. He was intubated, lines in both arms, chest compressions non-stop. By the time he hit the ER bay, he was pale, cold, pupils fixed. The trauma team went through the motions: advanced cardiac life support, drugs, shocks, cycles of CPR. After 35 minutes, the attending called it. Time of death, 1:47 a.m. The team filed out. A couple of orderlies prepped to move the body to the morgue, but things were backed up, so the man stayed in the trauma bay, zipped halfway in the black body bag. His right arm dangled out, stiff fingers curled. An hour later, I was sent in to restock. I remember the smell, the sharp tang of iodine, alcohol wipes, and that faint copper edge of blood you can't ever quite wash away. The trauma bay was empty except for him. I focused on the supply cabinet, avoiding the gurney. But then I heard it. A sound so subtle I thought at first it was my imagination. A wet, rattling inhale. I froze, a box of saline flushes in my hand. Slowly, I turned. His chest had moved. I stared, not breathing myself, waiting. A long pause and then another faint rise and fall. My brain scrambled for explanations. Post-mortem reflexes. Air trapped in the lungs, shifting out. I'd read about it, heard older doctors joke about it. Bodies can twitch, spasm, release air. Science could explain it. But then his fingers twitched. Not a spasm, an actual flex, slow and deliberate. The box slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor. I bolted for the hallway, calling for help. A resident and 2 nurses came running. When we checked, his monitor was flatline, cold skin, no pulse. They smirked at me, muttering about rookie nerves and first time alone with a body. One nurse even lifted his eyelid with a pen light. No reaction. They told me to log it as a false alarm and left. I stood there shaking, staring at the body, and then his eyes opened. Wide, bloodshot, pupils dilated. They locked onto mine, unblinking. I stumbled back against the cabinet, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own gasp. His lips parted slightly. No breath came out, but the sound. God, the sound. It was like a faint wet clicking, like someone trying to form words with lungs full of water. The bag's zipper trembled where it rested on his chest, as if he were trying to move. I couldn't look away. It was wrong. Not in a supernatural way, but in a human way. A man who should have been gone, body systems failed, brain starved of oxygen for nearly an hour, looking at me. The resident came back in, annoyed, and I babbled about the eyes. He leaned over, pressed his knuckles hard against the man's sternum. No response. Agonal reflexes, he said flatly. They can look like movement. It happens. He zipped the bag fully, sealing the face inside. But I swear. Those eyes followed me all the way out of the room. For weeks after, I couldn't stop replaying it. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, my brain making connections that weren't there. But late one night, an older nurse pulled me aside. "You saw one wake up, didn't you?" she whispered. I didn't answer, but I guess my expression was enough. She nodded grimly. It happens. Not often. Usually in the emergency room or the morgue. They're gone, then they're not. Sometimes just for seconds, sometimes longer. The doctors don't like us talking about it, but she trailed off. I finally managed to ask, "What happens to them?" Her eyes darkened. They don't stay. Not really. By the time anyone believes it, they're gone again. I never found that man's chart. I don't know if anyone documented what I saw. Maybe it was just my exhausted brain. But to this day, every time I'm alone with a body, I wait for the chest to move, the eyes to snap open. And I know, one day, it will happen again.